The bottle was still sitting on my kitchen counter when my daughter-in-law called to ask how it tasted. I remember staring at it for a moment. That beautiful dark glass, the gold foil around the neck, the little handwritten tag that said, "Happy Retirement, Mom, with love." My son's handwriting. I'd recognize it anywhere, even after 4 years of nothing. My name is Sylvia. I turned 63 in February, and I retired from my job at the school board in March after 31 years. 31 years of other people's paperwork, other people's budgets, other people's paperwork, other people's budgets. My colleague Joanne threw me a little party in the staff room with a sheet cake from Loblaws and a balloon that said "finally free," and I cried more than I expected to, not because I was sad to leave. I cried because I looked around that room and realized those were the people who had shown up for me, not my family. Joanne, the vice principal, the young secretary who always saved me a parking spot on Tuesdays, my son. I'll call him my son because that's what he is, even now, had not spoken to me in 4 years, not since the funeral, not since the argument in the parking lot of the church, the one where his wife stood beside him with her arms crossed and her jaw set, and he said things to me that I still can't fully repeat. About money, about my husband's estate, about how I had apparently been controlling and difficult his entire life, and he was done. I drove home from that funeral alone. I sat in my car in my driveway in Kanata for 40 minutes before I could go inside. 4 years, and then, 3 weeks after my retirement, a package arrived. It came through courier, which surprised me. A slim rectangular box, bubble-wrapped with a card tucked inside. A bottle of Chateau Pichon Longueville Baron, 2018. The kind of wine that costs over $200 at the LCBO. I know because I looked it up, standing right there in my hallway in my socks, because I couldn't make sense of it. My son had never been a wine person. His wife, Renata, was. She came from money, from a family in Oakville that had a wine cellar and opinions about vineyards, and she had always made me feel slightly embarrassed for serving yellowtail at Christmas. The card said, "We heard about your retirement. We're so proud of you. We hope this finds you well. Maybe it's time we talked. Kieran and Renata, we're so proud of you. We hope this finds you well." Like I was a distant acquaintance. Like 4 years hadn't passed. Like he hadn't said what he said in that parking lot. I set the bottle on the kitchen counter and I stood there for a long time. I want to be honest about what I felt because I think people expect me to say I was suspicious right away, and that's not entirely true. The first thing I felt was hope. I'm ashamed of how quickly it arrived. That hope, like it had just been waiting under the floorboards all along, ready to rush up the moment there was any crack. My son had reached out. He'd sent something thoughtful, something expensive. Maybe Renata had changed. Maybe he'd changed. Maybe something in the last 4 years had shifted and we could find our way back to something. I actually picked up the phone to call him. I had his number pulled up on the screen, and then I put it back down, because I also remembered the parking lot. I remembered the exact look on his face. I remembered that he had not called me when I had a minor cardiac procedure done 18 months ago. My sister had told his aunt, who told someone, and somehow he would have heard. He hadn't called, he hadn't sent a card, but he'd sent a card, but he'd sent a $200 bottle of wine for my retirement. I couldn't reconcile it. I stood in my kitchen and I couldn't reconcile it, and so I did what I do when I can't reconcile something. I set it aside and I moved on with my day. The reason I didn't drink the wine had nothing to do with suspicion. I want to be clear about that. My cardiologist, Dr. Ter, had told me after my procedure that I needed to eliminate alcohol for at least a year. My heart had shown some irregular rhythm, nothing catastrophic, but enough that he wanted me to take it seriously. I had been very good about it. I hadn't had a drink since the procedure. Not at Joanne's retirement party, not at my neighbour Daphne's birthday in November, not even at Christmas when my sister poured a glass of Bailey's and handed it to me out of habit, and I had to wave it off. So the wine sat on my counter for 2 days while I thought about what to do with it. On the third day, Daphne came over for coffee. Daphne is 71, lives next door, and has been one of my closest friends since my husband passed. She brings me soup when I'm sick, and I shovel her walkway when the snow comes before her son can get there. She is the kind of woman who still sends birthday cards by mail and means it. That afternoon she saw the bottle on the counter and her eyes went wide. "Sylvia," she said, "is that what I think it is?" I told her the whole story while the kettle boiled. She listened the way Daphne always listens, without interrupting, without making faces, just absorbing it all with that steady attention of hers. "What are you going to do with it?" she asked. "I can't drink it," I said. "My heart." "You could save it." "I don't want it sitting here," I said, which was true. Every time I walked past it, I felt that complicated clench in my chest. Not a cardiac thing, just the grief of it, the wanting and the worriness all tangled together. "Her garden club is doing a fundraiser Saturday," I said. I meant the bottle when I said it, gesturing vaguely. "One of those silent auction things at the community centre on Hazeldean. Something like that would do well, wouldn't it?" Daphne looked at the bottle and then at me. "Are you sure?" "I think so," I said. "I think I'd rather it went to something good." She picked it up carefully and turned it in her hands, reading the label. "This is a very nice bottle, Sylvia." "I know," I said. "That's why it'll do well." She took it with her when she left. I felt lighter after. That's the honest truth. I felt the counter was cleaner without it there. My son called on Sunday afternoon. I almost didn't answer. It was his name on the screen, Kieran, and I sat there through 3 rings, just looking at it, my heart doing something complicated. I picked up. "Hi, Mom," he said. His voice was the same. That was the thing that got me. His voice was exactly the same, and for a second I was back in 2019 before everything fell apart. "Hi," I said. "Did the wine arrive okay?" "It did," I said. "Thank you." "That was very kind." There was a pause. "So how was it? Did you enjoy it?" I hesitated. I actually can't drink right now," I said. "My heart." "I mentioned the procedure, I think, through your aunt." Right, he said quickly, too quickly. "But the wine, you got it, you opened it." "I gave it to my neighbor," I said. "For her garden club fundraiser. She needed something nice for the silent auction, and I can't drink, so it seemed like a good use of it." The silence that followed was not a normal silence. It was the kind of silence that has a texture to it, dense and airless. I've been a mother for 38 years. I know what silence sounds like when someone is thinking, when someone is searching for words, when someone is upset about something ordinary. This was none of those things. This silence had a different quality entirely, and I felt it move through the phone like cold air. "You gave it away," he said. His voice had changed. "Yes," I said slowly. I'm sorry if that wasn't the right thing to do. I should have called first. Who did you give it to?" "Daphne, my neighbor. She took it to a silent auction at the community centre on Hazeldean. Kieran, is something wrong?" Another pause. "No," he said. "No, everything's fine. I put a lot of thought into that bottle. I know. It was a beautiful choice. I really am grateful. I should go," he said. And he hung up. I sat in my chair for a long time after that call. The light was coming in through the kitchen window the way it does on March afternoons in Ottawa, that pale, thin light that feels like it's apologizing for the cold. I sat in it and I tried to understand what had just happened. He had asked me twice about the wine. Not, "How are you doing, Mum?" Not, "Did you get my card?" Not, "Can we talk?" He had asked how the wine was, whether I'd opened it, whether I'd had some. The cold moved up from my stomach before I had the words for it. I called my sister Audrey that evening. Audrey is 68, lives in Burlington, and has known Kieran since he was born. She listened to the whole thing without saying much, and when I finished she was quiet for a moment. "Sylvia," she said, "I want you to tell me something honestly." "All right." "Did he know about your heart?" "His aunt would have told someone," I said. "It went through the family." "But did he know you couldn't drink?" I thought about it. "I assumed he knew," I said, "but I don't know that he knew." "What do you mean you don't know?" "I mean, I don't know what he knows. We haven't spoken. I assumed it filtered through." I paused. "Why are you asking me that?" Audrey was quiet again, and the quality of her quiet reminded me of the quality of Kieran's silence on the phone, and I felt the cold again, higher up now. "Audrey." "I'm just asking," she said carefully. "You're not just asking," she exhaled. "You're not just asking." She exhaled. "When your husband left his estate to you entirely, and Kieran felt it should have been split. We've been through this. I know. I'm just thinking about the sequence of things." She paused. "His wife came from money, Sylvia. You've said that. And Kieran has always felt entitled, I think is the word, to things he hadn't earned." "What are you saying, Audrey?" She didn't say it, not outright. She said, "I'm saying you should maybe check on your neighbour." I called Daphne that night. She didn't answer. I tried twice more, and then I called her daughter, who lives in Gloucester. Her daughter answered on the second ring, and I heard something in her voice immediately, that tight, controlled worry that adult children develop, and she told me that Daphne had been taken to the Ottawa hospital that afternoon. She'd become very ill at the garden club meeting. Vomiting, dizziness, difficulty breathing. They were running tests. They didn't know yet what had caused it. I sat down on the floor. I don't know why I sat on the floor. I just did. I called the police the next morning. I want to explain what those hours between the call and the morning were like, because I don't think I've ever adequately explained it, even to Audrey, even to my therapist. It wasn't that I knew with certainty. It was that I had a picture forming in my mind, and every piece of it was from things I already knew, things that had already happened. And when I arranged them in a certain order, they made a shape I didn't want to look at directly. My son, estranged 4 years over money. My husband's estate, still contested as far as Kieran's lawyers were concerned. A life insurance policy my husband had taken out that still listed me as the beneficiary, worth $340,000. The policy Kieran had asked about, through the lawyers, twice in the last 2 years. A bottle of wine sent without warning, with no history of gift-giving, no preliminary conversation. A husband who'd asked twice if I'd had some. A neighbour in the hospital. The police were thorough. I'll give them that. The detective who came to my house was a woman named Officer Tremblay, and she sat across from me at my kitchen table with a notepad, and she did not treat me like a confused old woman. She asked careful questions. She wrote things down. She said she would be in touch. What I didn't expect was how quickly it moved after that. The bottle had been purchased at a private wine retailer in Mississauga. The contents had been tampered with. Daphne's blood work came back with traces of a compound that had no business being in a glass of Bordeaux. She was in hospital for 9 days. She recovered, thank God she recovered, but there were 72 hours in the middle where her daughter barely slept. There is a difference between suspecting something terrible about your child and having it confirmed. I had suspected. I had moved through those days with a kind of careful numbness, telling myself I could be wrong, telling myself there could be some other explanation, that the shape forming in my mind was just my fear making patterns where there were none. When Officer Tremblay called me 6 weeks later, I knew from her voice before she said a word. I have a memory from when Kieran was 7 years old. We were at a beach on Lake Huron, Grand Bend, I think, and he'd gotten turned around in the water and panicked, and I'd waded in fully dressed to reach him, and when I'd pulled him to me, he'd grabbed my neck so hard he'd left marks. He cried for 20 minutes. I held him and I counted his breaths until they slowed. I remember the weight of him. I remember thinking I would do anything. I've thought about that memory many times in the months since the call from Officer Tremblay. I've thought about how love doesn't always protect you from the person you love, how you can do everything right, be present, be steady, hold them when they're scared, and something can still go wrong in them that has nothing to do with you and everything to do with who they chose to become. Renata, it turned out, had known. Not everything, not at the start, but she knew more than she admitted, and eventually the knowing caught up with her too. Kieran was charged. The trial is pending. I've been told not to discuss the details, and I'm trying to respect that, though some days it's difficult. What I can tell you is that I changed the beneficiary on my life insurance policy. I can tell you that my estate lawyer, a quiet, patient man in Nepean named Mr. Beta, Achebe, redrew my will with a clarity that left nothing open to interpretation. I can tell you that Audrey and I have dinner together every Sunday now, alternating between Burlington and Kanata, and that those dinners have become one of the things I count on. Daphne came home from the hospital and we sat in her living room, and she held my hand for a long time without saying anything. She's like that, Daphne. She understands that some things don't need to be spoken to be understood. "It wasn't your fault," she said eventually. "I gave you the bottle," I said. "You didn't know. I should have known something. The silence on the phone, Sylvia." She squeezed my hand. "You hoped. That's not the same as being careless. You're a mother who hoped. I think about that a lot. You're a mother who hoped. The retirement I planned doesn't look the way I thought it would. I thought there might be reconciliation in it, somewhere. I thought retirement might be the season when things got quieter and easier and the old ruptures finally healed over. I was wrong about that, but I'd been learning to hold a different kind of hope. Not for a particular outcome, not for a son who comes back and says, "I'm sorry, Mom, I was wrong." Just a quieter, less urgent hope that life still has good things in it. And it does. That's the strange part, the part I wasn't expecting. Joanne came up from Ottawa last month, and we spent a Saturday at the Canadian Museum of History and walked along the river afterward, and the light on the water was something I'll remember for a long time. My sister sends me terrible puns by text, and I laugh at them, even when I don't want to. My heart is steady now, Dr. Osi says. Strong enough. Some doors, when they close for a reason. I spent 4 years pressing my ear against this one, listening for sounds on the other side, hoping it might open again. I'm not listening anymore. I've turned around. There's more house behind me than I remembered. I didn't set out to save my own life that afternoon. I just couldn't drink wine anymore, and Daphne needed something nice for the silent auction. That's the part I keep coming back to. The whole thing turned not on some dramatic decision, not on courage or foresight, but on a quiet medical instruction from Dr. Osi and the fact that my neighbour was raising money for her garden club. Cause and effect, running underneath everything, invisible until it wasn't. I've thought a lot about what kind of person Kieran became and whether I missed the signs. I don't think I did. I think some things develop slowly in people. A gradual hardening around resentment, a willingness to justify more and more until the unthinkable becomes thinkable. He watched his father's estate go somewhere he felt it shouldn't, and instead of sitting with that grief and letting it pass, he fed it. For 4 years he fed it quietly, and by the time he sent that bottle, he had convinced himself that what he was doing made a certain kind of sense. That's what dishonesty does over time. It doesn't announce itself. It just keeps rewriting the story until the person genuinely believes the version they've constructed. I'm not sure Kieran ever stopped to ask himself, clearly and honestly, what am I actually doing here? If he'd had the courage to look at his own reasoning without flinching, I don't believe he could have gone through with it. Integrity isn't some grand gesture. It's just the willingness to stay honest with yourself in the small moments before the small moments become something you can't take back. What I know now is that I wasn't wrong to hope. Daphne told me that, and she was right. Hope isn't the same as naivety. I hoped because I loved my son, and love doesn't evaporate just because someone hurts you. But there's a difference between hope that stays open and paying attention, and hope that goes blind. The version of me that almost answered that phone call and said yes, I opened it. It was lovely. That version of me had stopped paying attention. The silence on that phone call, the texture of it, the way he asked twice, something in me heard it. I'm grateful I listened. And then there was Daphne, recovering in a hospital room for 9 days because I gave her something I hadn't examined closely enough. That's the part that still keeps me up sometimes. She forgave me without hesitation, but forgiveness from someone else doesn't fully dissolve your own accounting. I made a careless choice, not malicious, not even thoughtless exactly, but careless, and someone I loved paid for it. You carry that. You should carry it. Not to punish yourself, but because that weight is what makes you more careful next time. That's how we actually learn things. Not from lectures or regret, but from the specific, personal, irreversible weight of consequence. What I want when I think about who I am on the other side of all this is to be someone who keeps all three things moving together. The honesty to see clearly, the wisdom to act on what I see, and the steadiness to keep going when it's hard. Sylvia, at 63, with her retirement and her quiet house and her Sunday dinners with Audrey, is still figuring out how to be that person. Some weeks are better than others, but I've turned around now, and there's more ahead than I remembered.